Let me open us with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your goodness. And we do pray, Lord, that we would be able to understand your word. But even more than that, that you would change us by it, that you would cause us to believe more, repent more, and obey more, that we would be pleasing in your sight, Father. And we know that that is the best thing for us as well. And so, Lord, again, just give us wisdom and give us a joy as we turn to your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I've been joking around with some people that we're going to cover some ground today, and I think that we are, because I think that we're able to do that without really going verse by verse, because I think we're getting a summary here at a certain point. So hopefully it'll make sense, even if you don't necessarily subscribe to the opinion that I'm more and more finding myself in line with as we go through, and feeling pretty good about it too, because reading a lot, I've never really studied the book. I mentioned that before. I'm really feeling pretty good about where things are just starting to make sense, and at least to me. Maybe you're like, well, I got the opposite feeling right now. But anyway, one of the things that I try to do with any study of Scripture is to hold on to, really the big principles, who God is, who we are, and nothing can contradict those things. And then to work out from there with an accurate and a consistent hermeneutic, where we take didactic as didactic and poetic as poetic and all the rest. Anyway, like I said, I feel pretty good about where we're at. So we looked at the first 6 bowls, and in the first 6 bowls, as in the first 6 trumpets, and under the 6th seal, we all saw the same kind of thing. God's people secured in different ways. They were with God in different ways. They were worshiping God in different ways, and God was pouring out his wrath on his enemies in different ways. 6th seal, 6th trumpet, 6 bowls. All right, so let me read where we're at now at the 7th bowl of Revelation chapter 16, verses 17 to 21. Then the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon was remembered before God, to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, since the plague was exceedingly great. Now compare that to the 7th trumpet. Back in chapter 11, verse 15. Then the 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." And the 24 elders who sit on the thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, "We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath came, and the time for the dead to be judged, and for the rewarding of your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. And God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple, and there were flashes of lightnings and rumblings and peals of thunder and an earthquake and very heavy hail." Sounds pretty similar, and that's what I'm seeing more and more as we go on here. This different way of describing the same thing, with more of a focus on heaven and the elders and proclaiming God's kingdom has come. Here, more of a focus on the earth and the destruction. Verse 17, notice again, "It is done." Not the exact same phrase as "it is finished" that Jesus says, but the same perfect tense of "it has been," or "it is being done," or it has been done, you could say. But really, "it is done" is the best way to say it. And most of the translations say it that way. It is done. It's done. The second scroll's decrees, in other words, have all been executed. Remember the first scroll, the 7 seals. The second scroll back in chapter 10 that the angel brought down, that he ate and it was sweet, but then it was bitter. What did that include? Well, that included verse 7 of chapter 10. The mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So it is done, verse 17, all the way back in verse 10, or chapter 10, verse 7, when he gave that scroll that we've just been going through, he said the mystery of God would be fulfilled. Now that that's happened, he said it is done. So what was announced to the prophets? Now, dispensationalism would say only Israel. The church age is unforeseen. It's the great intercalation. I don't know if you've ever heard of those terms, but intercalation in the sense of it's in the calendar, the great parenthesis, but it's Israel is the program, Israel's the program before, Israel's the program afterwards. There's a parenthesis, an intercalation of a Gentile church age that's mentioned, but it's really not foreseen. Now, that's not Reformed theology. Reformed theology is that the prophets talked about the church, that when they talked about Israel, they had in mind a fuller program, and that many of the things that we look at under Israelite terms are really types and shadows and figures of the Christ to come and of the fullness that would be seen in the church. And you have all kinds of things like that we sing about every year at Messiah, right? You know, the Handel's Messiah. All of those passages about Jesus are in the Old Testament. And they're sung about and very specific and very exactly. The prophets clearly saw. And the church age was not a parenthesis, it was the fullness. Not the ultimate fullness, which is the new heavens and the new earth, but the great fulfillment, the great step forward that Israel and every true Jew should have wanted and should have looked forward to. They shouldn't have looked at it as, oh no, we're not going to be number one nation anymore, and now the Gentiles are let in, those filthy scum. They should have been like, this is awesome. God's kingdom is so much bigger. Now it's the whole world. And the remnant obviously did respond that way. So the prophets saw the consummation of all things and God's final victory over sin, and it's bigger than just Israel. Remember, Israel isn't the fullness of the story. It's a big part of the Old Testament. But we begin in the garden. Mankind, the world. Noah's Ark, mankind, the world. Israel gets picked up by God when he begins to work with a group of people through which the Messiah would come. But the Messiah was promised in the garden. And that continued. And so we don't want to just make it all about Israel. Israel is very important. But it is a piece of the puzzle that began with all mankind again in the garden, sin, and the Savior who would come and save all of God's people who from the very beginning, even the moment God chose Abram, right? It's the father of many nations. All the peoples of the world will be blessed in you. It was always bigger than just Israel. And to make it about that, I think at this point, is to miss that. So verse 17, notice the bowl is poured into the air, which is really interesting because the kingdom of Satan is often described, and certainly in the world of that time, they would have described it as filling the air, right? That the demons fill the air. And there's some scripture that would say this. And I'm not going to say that I understand exactly what that means, other than the fact that, when we think of spirits, the word spirit in the Bible is also the same word for wind, which is air. And the demons are spirits. And the Bible pictures Satan as one who has the power of the air. We have that in Ephesians 2, a very specific verse. You followed the course of this world. You followed the prince of the power of the air. Everybody knows that's Satan, the spirit who is now at work in the sons of disobedience. And so here is Satan pictured as the one in the air. And of course, this bowl of wrath is poured on the air. The demonic kingdom of the Antichrist directly judged here. As God is punishing the demonic, and ultimately hell includes, in fact, hell was built for, according to Scripture, the devil and his angels. And we have some other passages like this, that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places, which is in the air. So the Bible uses this kind of language. And so here I think at the very end, we're seeing Satan and his kingdom directly judged as the bowl of wrath is poured into the air. So there's some other places we could look at, and I cite some of the other verses, but we've looked at them already, where Jesus is judging Satan. Jesus came to destroy Satan. He says that when he's about to go to the cross. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out, and I will draw all people to me. And so, and then we see Christ defeating Satan, and then we see the picture of the war in heaven, and Satan and his demons cast out of heaven to the earth. And that Jesus himself came, according to Hebrews, to destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. And so there is this cosmic war of Christ and Satan. Satan tries to tempt Jesus. We know that at the beginning. He tries to get him to fall. That's the one that Jesus came to destroy. And he says, to his disciples, I saw Satan fall, I give you authority. So Christ does exercise this victory. Verse 18, we have these lightnings, thunders, sounds. Just the word voices or sounds. Greatest earthquake. And you see that we saw the same thing in Revelation 4 when the vision of heaven, and Revelation 6 and Revelation 8 and Revelation 11, both in 13 and 19. Lightnings, thunder, sound, earthquakes. The cup of God's wrath is drained in verse 19. By the way, that's happens in the Old Testament, and several times that the wicked drain the cup of God's wrath pictured in a cup. Here it's in bowls. And you see this in different verses, Zechariah, Haggai, the Psalms. Here's just a couple examples. Psalm 75:8. In the hand of the Lord there is a cup foaming with wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to its dregs. The wicked are always pictured as getting all of the wrath of God. And we saw back in Revelation 14, sort of out of the blue, John brings Babylon into this picture. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, the wine of the passion of her fornication. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast or its images, receives its mark, he will drink of the wine of God's wrath. So that was said all the way back before. Poured full strength into the cup of his anger. They'll be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, which is what it means to drink all of God's wrath, to be in hell. So the spiritual nature of Babylon also is seen in Isaiah chapter 13, in chapter 21, and in Jeremiah chapter 51, Isaiah 13, 19, and Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Very, obviously, very powerful symbols, Babylon, Sodom, Gomorrah. The next verse, it will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there. Their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. The hyenas will howl in their citadels, etc. It just goes on about how Babylon will be utterly devastated. In Isaiah chapter 21, we get this statement, verse 9. And look, here comes a chariot of men with a pair of horses. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Same kind of thing we're getting here. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And all the carved images of her gods he has broken to the ground. Jeremiah 51, if you have time to read that, the whole chapter is about the destruction of Babylon. And really in kind of a spiritual, all-encompassing evil kind of sense. Flee from the midst of Babylon. Everyone save his life. Do not be cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He shall recompense her. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand. Isn't that interesting? That made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine. Therefore the nations are deranged. Babylon has suddenly fallen and been destroyed. Wail for her. Wail for her. Take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. But then Jeremiah goes on to say, no, she won't be. But here's this image again of this city that made all the nations drunk with what she was peddling, which was wickedness. So this spiritual nature, this sort of symbol of Babylon is something that John draws from now because, again, he mentions her sort of out of the blue in chapter 14, verse 8 for the first time, which we just looked at. And then now again, chapter 16, verse 19. Babylon, all of a sudden. Only the second time mentioned in the book, out of the blue. But if we look in those Old Testament passages, it makes sense. Babylon's the symbol of wickedness, the symbol of idolatry, the symbol of sexual immorality and all sorts of wicked pleasures of sin. Babylon is the symbol of all of those things. All right. In verse 20, we see every island fled away. The mountains were not found. We saw this same thing said in 6:14. The sky vanished like a scroll. Every mountain and every island was removed from its place. That's 6:14. In 20:11, we'll see the same thing. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. Also in chapter 8, verse 5, verse 8, the islands, the mountains fleeing away. Verse 21, the worst possible hailstorm. Hail, thunder, and fire. Remember, were also the seventh plague on Egypt. This fiery hail that rained. And then we see hail again coming down in Ezekiel 38, 18 to 22. God says, with pestilence and with blood I will enter into judgment with him. I will rain on him and on his troops and on the many peoples who are with him, a torrential rain with hailstones, fire, and brimstone. This is Gog and Magog. All right, Ezekiel 38. When they come up and listen to some of the language. I'll go back and read a little bit more. So Ezekiel 38, 18, it will come about on that day when Gog comes against the land of Israel, declares the Lord, that my fury will mount up and my anger, my zeal and my blazing wrath. I declare that on that day I will surely make a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all the creeping things that creep on the earth. So all of creation here. And all the men who are on the face of the earth will shake at my presence. The mountains will be thrown down. Steep pathways will collapse and every wall will fall to the ground. And I will call for a sword against him on all my mountains, declares the Lord, and every man's sword will be against his brother. And then the verse that I read about pestilence and blood and hail and fire and brimstone. And we saw this in chapter 6. At the breaking of the sixth seal. He broke the sixth seal, verse 12. There was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The moon became like blood. The stars of the sky fell to the earth. As a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by the wind, the sky was split apart like a scroll and rolled up. Every mountain and every island moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and the slave and every free man hid himself in the caves and among the rocks. And they said to the mountains, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand. And I argued at that point that was the ultimate judgment day, and I think that's what we're at here again, cycling through in another series of symbolic images that ultimately are about God's wrath on his enemies and his salvation for his people. There are other views. One of the views is that the hailstones, about 100 pounds, were literal rocks that Rome was lobbing in with its catapults that supposedly were painted white so that you couldn't see them. But then they had watchmen on the wall who would say, here comes the hailstones. So Rome then, so that you could see them. So Rome then painted them black, and then they launched them and you couldn't see them anymore. But I see these images being repeated to the point of, I think that's a mistake, to try to find these literal ways to fulfill this, whether in the past or in the future. I'm really seeing a similarity of both the preterist and the dispensationalist view of we've got to find a literal counterpart to each one of these things, where these things are very symbolic, both in the Old and New Testament, and they speak of God's salvation and God's wrath. So chapter 17 gets us into the third vision. And this is important. This is a new vision now. That's very clear when we see in verse 3, he carries me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw. Okay, now something new. Okay. Twice before, John again mentioned Babylon out of the blue. Here, I think what we're seeing is a recapitulation of what we've seen before, but with a focus on the judgment of this great harlot that he's just mentioned twice, kind of obscurely, and now he's going to go into great detail. And she's called a great harlot. She's called that city that reigns over the kings. And one of the angels with the 7 bowls of wrath now comes to John and says, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." So the wrath is done. This guy doesn't have anything to do. He comes over and says, hey, one of the angels who had poured the wrath out on the earth. And so, obviously symbolic, visionary type focus. We can't be thinking in terms of a linear line. Oh, this is later. All these visions, time doesn't, correspond to everything, follows one another. It's a vision. It's another vision. So who is this woman? Verses 1 and 2. The great harlot, she sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. The inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. The exact kind of language that we saw in Jeremiah. The whole earth drunk with the cup that Babylon had. All right, that word fornication is porneo in the verb form, which is porneia in the noun form. And it means sexual immorality, so it could mean harlotry, it could mean adultery. Here it's translated fornication, but it includes all sexual sin. And sexual immorality is the common metaphor for idolatry, unfaithfulness to God. And that's really what the image is here. It's not precisely sexual sin. It's idolatry and sin against God in general. And of course, idolatry would include all sin, because everything is an idol when we make it higher than God. And so sinful idolatry here always tempts us by outward attraction, but inward it's always death. And that's the picture you get. This woman who has this beautiful cup in her hand, and she's adorned with gold and purple and scarlet. So this is wealth and luxury. It's beauty, right? This is all that you could want in this world. And in her cup is this golden and gorgeous goblet with precious stones and pearls and, all kinds of just beauty and ornate cup. But in the cup, filth, abomination, wretchedness, filthiness. This is the sinful world, right? The outward is everything. The inward we want to hide, because the outward we can make look good, but the inward is wickedness, and wickedness is the ultimate ugliness and death. So, perhaps here a more specific, I just say this, alignment with sort of an anti-God religion and an anti-God morality, kind of a political correctness where, hey, everything's about what's right and wrong now. It's really not politics, right? Political correctness has nothing to do with politics per se. It's the politicizing of everything. If you say something politically incorrect, you're saying something wrong. You're bad. You're evil. This is good and evil, and this is what they're doing. I think modern day wokeism is kind of like that, right? If you're woke, you know what's good, and if you're woke, you know what's bad. And it has nothing to do with the Bible and what God says. It's whatever man is doing now and saying is good and right now. So this is the drunk harlot, and she is the counterpart, the satanic counterpart of the faithful, glorious woman of chapter 12. The woman clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, stars as ornate jewels in her crown. The true bride of God. And here is the imitation from Satan, all that he can get in the outward. By the way, Israel, as well as pagan cities, were likened to harlots in the Old Testament. And it was always because of their idolatry and their indulgence in sin. And you can look at some of these verses. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 21, how the faithful city has become a harlot. Right off the bat in Isaiah chapter 1. And he's talking about Jerusalem, obviously. It was full of justice, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. So that's what makes it a harlot. Not exactly sexual sin, but sin. Murderers are now there. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. So, the purity that you had, the true riches, now it's diluted. Wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebellious, companions of thieves. Everyone loves bribes and follows after rewards. They do not defend the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow come before them. So this is what it means for a nation to be a harlot, to love sin. Another passage, Isaiah 23:17, and it will come about at the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, a pagan city. Then she will go back to her harlot's wages, and she will play the harlot with the kingdoms on the face of the earth. So Tyre becomes a harlot when she begins to spread idolatry and sin into the world. Nahum chapter 3, verse 4. Because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. And I think this one in Nahum is talking about Nineveh. Again, another pagan city that becomes a harlot that spreads sin through the world. And that's what's said about, again, Tyre, about Nineveh, about Babylon, about Jerusalem, about every city that becomes wicked. It's hard to picture America not as a harlot. Especially when you look at some of the things that, our enemies criticize us for. If you read anything or see anything from, for example, Muslim countries, what do they hate about America? Well, the harlotry. I mean, literally, right? I mean, they see Hollywood and they see debauchery and they see pornography and they see all this sexual sin and all this drug use. And they say, look at America. It's disgusting. It spreads all this horrible stuff through the world. One of our great exports is probably pornography and sexual sin. And again, the party lifestyle and drunkenness. I mean, isn't that what, America sends throughout the world? And pretty much every nation that gets powerful does that, right? Rome falls. Why does Rome fall? Decadence. While Rome was strict and was very serious about citizenship and armies and families, and they had laws against adultery, pagan Rome. Because they so prized the pure seed, and that Roman citizens would have Roman children, and that the Roman soldiers would be trained and disciplined, and they hated the luxury of the Eastern kingdoms that they saw as weak and luxurious and into, pleasures. Rome was strict and militaristic, and they conquered the world. And when they became luxurious like the rest of the world and soft, and they begin to they actually do this. They lighten the weight of the armor and lighten the weight of the sword. It was too hard to be a really tough Roman soldier, so let's make everything easier. And Rome's legions are no longer suddenly victorious, and they're no longer suddenly feared, and compromise one standard after another, and indulge in the pleasures of sin. And this is how Rome fell. So she sits on many waters. All right, that's the first picture of this woman. That would connote many kingdoms, not just one single people. Many waters, many kingdoms, not a single city, by the way. Rome itself is on the Tiber River, not many waters, and Jerusalem doesn't have many waters. But actually, ancient Babylon in Jeremiah was described as sitting by many waters, because the city of Babylon, the ancient city, had many canals that were diverted through it and around it. It had all these rivers going through the city itself. And so Jeremiah 51 verse 13, O you who dwell by many waters, abundant in treasures, your end has come, the measure of your covetousness. And so again, the judgment on Babylon, but here Babylon itself, the literal Babylon, all these waters, because it was true. But here I think the waters clearly are peoples, multitudes, nations. That's what verse 15 says. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So maybe you were disagreeing with me until now. And now you're saying, okay, well, I guess I gotta give it to you that the waters are many nations and peoples and multitudes and tongues. Verse 2, the kings of the earth and the inhabitants of the earth. This repeatedly is unbelievers in the book of Revelation, the inhabitants of the earth, the land dwellers, the earth dwellers. These are the unbelievers, those who commit fornication with her. And in verse 3, we say, she is sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names and blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Clearly, this is the first beast of chapter 13, which had 7 heads and 10 horns. There, the color was not pictured, but there, it was given all this power by the dragon, and the dragon was scarlet. The dragon was red. Now the beast itself is red. It's seen to be aligned with the dragon, and that's what 13 literally said. So it's a red scarlet beast, also a symbol of luxurious and wealth. And she's seated on many waters. She's seated on a beast. Okay, well, that's apocalyptic literature. It doesn't need to be like rationally consistent. It's image after image. Many waters, influence in all the nations. On the beast, the power of satanic influence in the world. And the woman gets her opulence from and is totally dependent on the power and influence of Satan in the world. I think that's the symbol here. She's sitting on the beast and she's drunk. She's, in a sense, acting as if she has control of the beast. She's very proud, very boisterous. This is you get the picture of a loud, drunken, prostitute. I mean, that's what you're seeing here. The names of blasphemy would be because, remember, the beast has demanded to be worshipped instead of God. And so there's many blasphemous names on the beast because the beast is saying, you have to worship me instead of God. That happened in chapter 13 when you had to take the number. If you did, and if you didn't, you couldn't buy or sell. And the number was the worship of the beast. So we have verse 5, written on her forehead was a name, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. Now this is interesting because we've seen names on foreheads repeatedly now in the book of Revelation. God's servants sealed with his name on their forehead. First it was just said to be a seal, and then later, chapter 14, it's actually his name. And then the beast servants have his name or his number on their forehead. And now Mystery Babylon has a name on their forehead. By the way, the redeemed in chapter 3, all the way back, one of the promises Jesus had to those faithful Christians in one of the churches, where he says, I will make him who overcomes a pillar in the temple of my God. I will write on him the name of my God. I will write on him my new name. So this idea of having someone's name written, of course, the forehead is the first thing you see. That proclaims who you are. And so we have this written on this now woman. By the way, the word mystery could be part of what's written, or he could be saying, as the ESV and other ones say, and written on her forehead, a name was written, a mystery. And then what was written is actually Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So is mystery part of the title, or is mystery part of the description of the title? The language doesn't determine it. You could do it either way. It doesn't change the meaning per se. Mystery just means something that's secret, hidden, that needs to be revealed by God. She is the mother of, that means the great source of, the greatest example of, right? You remember when Saddam Hussein said he was going to give us the mother of all battles? That's a common Middle Eastern kind of statement. The biggest, the most, the end of all things. And that's what she's said to be here, the mother of all heart. This is the epitome of idolatry. This is it. This is the image of the greatest and all of the culmination of idolatry, sin, wickedness, the pleasure of sin. And remember, while John is writing this text, there is still a city in Iraq called Babylon that many Jews lived at. The Babylonian Talmud hasn't been written yet. And that's the big important Talmud for the Jewish tradition. So there's a city right there in Iraq. So I don't think the people reading this are thinking that he means that city. They're understanding the symbolic nature of Babylon as the great symbol of wickedness in the Old Testament. And so I think, again, with this, it's written on her forehead. This, to me, is another powerful argument that these things written on foreheads are not literal. That the number of the beast is not going to be literally written on someone's forehead. That's a symbol for they worship Satan. Just as someone who has God's name on their forehead, it's not literally going to be a tattoo on your head, but it means that you belong to God. By the way, some of the prostitutes in Rome at this time would wear headbands, and it would say the name of their owner on the front of the headband, so you would know who to pay when you went with this or that prostitute. So this idea of having a name on the forehead was something that they understood very, very readily. All right, so the saints have names on them in 7:3, 9:4, 14:1. The redeemed get a name on them in chapter 3, verse 12, and in chapter 22 at the end, verse 4. It says, they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads. There it's on the forehead again. It's always on the forehead. But that's the first thing you see. When you look at someone, you see their forehead. And so this metaphorical name of, I belong to this person, his name is on my forehead. I think that's what we're seeing, and that's what this woman is proclaiming. This is who she is. It's on her. It's written on her face, we might say, right? It's written all over his face. Well, that's what we're seeing here, it seems to me. Babylon, what is it? Is it a literal city, the actual one that was in Iraq at the time, but to be rebuilt in some newer, greater way? Is it Jerusalem in apostasy, past or in the future? Is it Rome then, or in a new Rome? Is it an actual literal city? Is it a metaphor for the unbelieving, unrepentant powers of the world? I would say no, because that's the beast. That's what it's riding. Is it symbolic for the false religion and the church, or apostasy in Israel, past or future? No, that's the false prophet, the second beast. I think what Babylon is, and I want to prove this to you, hopefully we'll get there, is symbolic of all of the opulence, all of the wealth, all of the prosperity, all of the pleasure, all of everything that we can have in this world. It's this world. It's human civilization apart from God. It's material wealth apart from God. It's Jesus talks about, what if a man gets the whole world but loses his soul? This is the whole world. This is Babylon and all that we can produce. The beast, I would say, therefore, is the anti-Christian power, the persecution that comes from the satanic-inspired governments, and the harlot is the anti-Christian culture, the seduction that comes. So the beast enforces Christians to bow the knee, and the harlot seduces them. It's the same temptation, turn away from God, either by force or by temptation, right? Think of Jesus, the stony ground. It gets hot, stony ground capitulates. The thorny ground, boy, those thorns come in, the temptations of the world, wins you away. These are the two forces of Satan to try to destroy God's people. And notice in verse 6, the woman is drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. That's the same category of people. That's not two different kinds of people. If you're a saint, you're a believer in Jesus. And if you're a believer in Jesus, you're a saint. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. John is pictured as being astonished at this woman and this symbol here. It's just so powerful, so full and just horrible. And remember, this woman is now drunk with the blood of the saints. And so it seems to me to try to narrow this down to one period of time, like Nero. He did have a brief persecution of the saints. Let me read from Tacitus, something that Nero did. A great crowd was convicted both of arson and of hatred of the human race. That's the Christians. They were convicted of arson and hatred. So this was Nero's pretext to go against them. Not only were they put to death, but put to death with insult, in that they were either dressed in the skins of beasts to perish by attacking dogs, or put on crosses or set on fire. And when the daylight failed, they were burnt for lights for the night. So this happened in a very short period of time, and not a lot of Christians, because it was just in Rome, but it did happen. Domitian kills many more Christians. But it seems, again, that you really, that's not enough for this image that astonishes John. John knows all the different persecutors of the Christian faith, from Pharaoh to Nebuchadnezzar to Persia, whoever it was. He knows all of them, and Israel has holidays, to celebrate their demise when God brings them down. But I think what we're seeing here is the fullness of all of that. Verses 7 and 8. Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. Was and is not. I think this is what we're seeing before with the heads. Remember, the head was killed, one of the heads, and then it comes back to life. It was and is not, but it will come and go to perdition. Those who dwell on the earth will marvel. Remember, that's what happened before with the second beast doing miracles and saying, worship the beast, and he makes the image talk. So they marvel, all whose names are not written in the book of life. That's again what we saw in 13. When they see the beast that was and is not and yet is, because he was alive and then he died, and then somehow he miraculously comes back, and that's the marveling. That's why the second beast says, worship the first beast. So we see that. The dragon had 7 heads, and the beast has 7 heads. The beast can only capture the non-elect. Unbelievers sell their souls for gains in this temporal world. I think that's what we're seeing. Believers store up treasures in heaven. That's the difference. And that's what taking the mark of the beast is all about, living for the world, living for Satan. And again, you see this anti-God fabrication and mockery of the marveling, the pseudo-miracles. John introduces God at the very beginning of this book, chapter 1, verse 4, as him who was and who is to come. And that's what Satan wants to be now, the one who was and is to come, because he dies and comes back. So again, the mockery of God, the try to imitate God, try to replace God. Jesus introduced himself in chapter 1, verse 8. I am the Alpha and the Omega, who is, who was, who is to come. So we keep getting this with the satanic imitation. Verses 9 and 10, the 7 heads are both mountains and kings. All right. Rome is famously the city built on 7 hills. She rules them. You see that here. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. To sit on the mountains is to rule them, to have dominion over them. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and when the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. All right, so what are we seeing here? Notice again, we get the call for wisdom in verse 9. That's important because we had the same call for wisdom with the number of beasts. This calls for wisdom, 13:8. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast. And here's the mind which has wisdom. 7 heads, 7 mountains, 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, 1 has not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short while. Now, this is some of the arguments here, or some of the powerful arguments you're going to get from the preterist perspective, that Rome clearly is and is the only city that we know of that sits on 7 hills. The 7 kings are said to be, if you count from, and this is part of the issue, who do you start to count with? If you count from Augustus, who is the first emperor, the first king, it doesn't work. But if you count from Julius Caesar, who kind of sets it forward, but he's not an emperor, then you can get Nero as number 6. Galba would be the 7th, and he reigns for 7 months. Others believe John's writing during Domitian. They still want to talk about these kings. Galba is number 1 because that's the renewal of the beast after Nero dies. So Galba is the first one after Nero, and then Domitian works out, number 6, the great persecutor of the church. Nerva is the one who comes number 7, and he only reigns 16 months. And so they, there's different ways you can do that. The other side of it is, are the kings kingdoms? Are the kings kings, or are the kings kingdoms? You say, well, it says they're kings. Well, in Daniel, the beasts were called kings, but they're clearly kingdoms. You see that in Daniel chapter 7, verse 17. If you see those 4 beasts comes out of the world, the sea, then they devour one another. Daniel 7:17 says, those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. Yet we all know that they're Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Everybody knows that's who they are. So he calls them kings, but they're actually kingdoms. That's not uncommon, again, in Scripture. And it's not uncommon for mountains to be likened to nations. In Jeremiah 51, Babylon is called a mountain. 51:25, behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, who destroys all the earth, says the Lord. I will stretch out my hand against you. I will roll you down from the rocks. I will make you a burnt mountain, etc. And then in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 7, who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, etc. And so for a pagan nation to become a mountain or to be called a mountain in apocalyptic literature is not unheard of. And so my understanding of this text is that what we're seeing here is the 7 hills are all the world. And that the woman sitting on them, again, is all of the world's opulence and so forth. And that these kings are actually the kingdoms of the world. And the 8th king is the 8th kingdom that has the actual Antichrist that is going to reign someday before Christ comes. And the reason why I do this is because it's hard to make it work historically. If you have the 8th that comes under the first grouping with Julius number 1, the 8th is Otho. He reigns 3 months. He doesn't do anything. In the latter view, Trajan is the 8th, and he has a great persecution against the church. And he reigns 19 years, etc. Yet neither of these kings were of the 7 unless you go back to spiritualizing the numbers. Now, the important thing in this part, and again, you can disagree because it's hard to, this is difficult. But the important thing, I think, one of the things you've got to, I think, reckon with is in chapter 17, verses 8 through 12 that I just read. The beast that was, is not, comes out of perdition and will be, or goes to perdition. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must reign is short. Wow. 3 times in this passage, from verses 8 through 12, John clearly says the beast has not yet come. That's what he says. He hasn't come yet. He's coming. He hasn't come yet. He'll come in the future. He doesn't now exist. He was, but he is not. While John's writing, to me that would rule out Nero. Nero is. He's the beast at that moment. John's saying the beast isn't now. He was, he will be again. And so that's pushing me really to the symbolic understanding, and I think it fits better. 12 to 14, the 10 horns are 10 kings. They haven't received their kingdom yet. Again, that's really hard to make historically, whether past or future. They receive authority from the beast. Now, some have said, well, there were 10 Persian satraps who, according to the Sibylline oracle, would help a revived Nero regain power. And that was a rumor that was going around. The problem is, there were 20 satraps established by Darius, and they don't get their power until the beast gives it to them. They don't help the beast get power. It's the opposite of what happens. And by the way, it didn't happen. The Sibylline oracle was wrong. They didn't rise up, and Nero doesn't come back to life. All right, so the 1 hour here I would liken to the 3.5 days of the death of the witnesses, the very short time in which the church is eclipsed before judgment comes in Armageddon. 10 would be the fullness of power, completeness and fullness, 10 Roman provinces. But then you have to, again, spiritualize the numbers, and that doesn't make it work. I don't think you do it literal when you can and then spiritualize. I think the whole thing is symbolic. I think that's more consistent. Daniel chapter 7, verse 7 and verse 24, the final beast has 10 horns, and the 10 horns are 10 kings. So I think John is just using that imagery. It's the fullness again of the world giving its power to the beast. Daniel chapter 7, verse 23, I give you the text. The 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth, trample, break in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who arise from this kingdom. Another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first. He shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute The saints of the Most High, he shall attend to change times. The saints will be given into his hand for time, and half a time. That's what we've seen already, that 3.5 years, that's 3.5 days. The 10 horns, 10 kings, powers, leaders, systems, art, education, entertainment, commerce, industry, again, harlot. Verse 16, the horns turn on the harlot and destroy her. This is kind of like a civil war in the beast kingdom here, but this is, I think, consistent. The harlot is basically the one trying to get pleasure, riding along with the beast, really not going with his program, but getting as much as she can out of it, right? These are the kind of, like the Christians who go along with the world. You know, well, I'm not going to judge anybody, and I'm going to get as much as I can out of the world, and I'm not of the world, you know, but you're making, you know, you're riding on the beast, basically. And the beast is going to turn on her at the end and destroy her. And that's what we see here. They make war with her. They hate her. They burn her flesh. God has put it into their hearts for this purpose, to be of one mind. And so everything's going to be mobilized at the end. All of that, all those taggers along, you're either going to be put in the army of the beast or you're going to be killed. You're not going to be able to just go along and, you know, and benefit from it anymore. And I think that's what 18 is about, the final mobilization of all of Satan's forces against God. And that woman is going to be, again, those who benefit, you know, from satanic culture and who just never call it out are going to be destroyed. And so God's purposes are being fulfilled by these things, by the beast, by the harlot, by the king. That's the message. God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, verse 17. And that's what's happening. And so verse 18, or chapter 18, and believe it or not, I'm just going to cover this right now because I think what we're seeing, I want to just read it to you, and maybe we can do it more verse for verse. But if you take everything that we've just said, all right, about the spiritual nature of Babylon, now you're going to get zoomed in and see, what is Babylon really? The opulence of the world? Is it all that the world has to offer? And I think this chapter just, to me, it cements it. This is what Babylon is. This is worldliness. This is wickedness. This is the pleasure of sin. All of it wrapped up in this harlot. Again, this imitation of God's bride. The one who says she's good. Isn't that what the world always says? We're good. Look at this. Listen to this chapter with that in mind. This is an image of all of the wickedness of the world against God. All the pleasures, entertainment, education, whatever. Wealth, commerce. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Uncleanness, something, an abomination to the people of God. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath, the passion of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out from her, my people, lest you share in her sins, lest you receive of her plagues. Don't go for the world. Don't listen to the world's temptations. Be like the world. Just don't live for God. No, come out from her. For her sins have reached to heaven. God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you. Repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. So what she has done now is going to come back upon her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure, give her torment and sorrow, because she said in her heart, I sit as a queen. I am a widow. I will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day. Death and mourning and famine. She will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. All the glories of the world, all the pleasures that they had, burning up, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, the mighty city, in 1 hour your judgment has come. And all the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen, purple and silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and incense and fragrant oil and frankincense and wine and oil, fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep, horses and chariots and the bodies and souls of men. How can this not be all of the world? How can this be one point in time, one city, whether future or past? The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. And the merchants of these things, who became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, alas, alas, that great city was clothed in linen and purple and scarlet and gold and precious stones and pearls, and in 1 hour such great riches come to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, look at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is this great city? All the world trade and all the wealth and all the pleasures that's thrown out. They throw dust on their heads. They cry out, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, the great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. Again, just this worldwide picture of all the pleasure that you can have apart from God. It's going to come to an end, is what this is saying. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. And then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, threw it into the sea. With violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall be found no more. And then the sound of harpists and musicians and flutes. And again, more pleasures, right? No more. Craftsmen, no more. The lights, no more. Brides and bridegrooms. Culture, no more. Merchants, no more. Sorcery, no more. Because what? In her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints of all who were slain in the earth. The world that denies God and tries to go along and doesn't go along with God, that persecutes the church, will be destroyed. I think that's the message of chapter 18. So that was kind of crazy, huh? But I think when you read it like that, and you see those images, and they come together, and it's like, this is everything. This is the end. This is what the prophets look forward to. That whole thing, it is done. This isn't just one example of that, as great as it might have been. And I think that's why ancient Jerusalem fits so well. It was a great example of this, judged. But there are greater, and there's more, and there's some in the world today, and ultimately they're all going to be judged. And if that's not what this is saying, then it seems to me that it's overblown. The imagery is too great for the picture of some one point in time. But if you take it as the whole world, and then we know eventually everybody joins forces again at the end of the book and says, okay, this is the end of time. The new heavens and the new earth is not, some temporal example. This is eternity now. We do get there by the end of the book. So all I'm saying is at this point in the book, and then in chapter 19, we're going to get again this judgment with Christ coming. 19 and 20 we'll try to do next week. And that's the final judgment. And that's the millennial question. So that'll be fun. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. I do pray, Lord, that we will benefit from it, Father. I do pray that these images would not frighten us, but would cause us to have more faith in you, that you will judge, that the wicked who seem to get away with it and seem to get rich off of it and seem to get so much pleasure out of it will one day all answer for their crimes. And we know that's the case. And so, Father, help us to be faithful, to come out from among her, to not be tempted by her seductions, Lord God, that we would be faithful to you, knowing that you are the God who has given us all that is really good. And we thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.